also the University Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. I'm delighted that Alex, our host and organiser today, Mr. Kondakov, has invited me to chair this first session, but also, just to say also a few words of welcome about UCD and about the importance of this event for the university. I'll start a little bit about the university. We're in the University Law School, the Southern School of Law, which was very much established as to be a beacon of inclusive education and research around law and law and society. If you look around the windows, you'll see various inspiring quotations about the law that are intended to inspire our students with a vision of what law can do to improve our society. And we've done a lot of work in the law school over recent years to build more inclusive education, drawing a wide range of students, many more students from underrepresented societies, underrepresented groups, and so on. And I'm particularly pleased to be asked to chair this event today, which is a civil society and academic collaboration in combating anti-LGBTQ hate crime, because as a college principal, the collaboration between academia and civil society is enormously important, both in understanding and addressing societal challenges. And you'll all today be aware of the very significant challenges around hate crime, not just for LGBTQI communities, but also for others with legislation for protected characteristics. And the recent CSACo data showed that anti-racist hate crime is the largest area of hate crime, but that anti-LGBTQI hate crime is the second largest category. It's a very significant societal challenge, one that in our university we wish to contribute significantly to addressing. I'm also pleased to be here with another hat on as a member of the Irish Church Council, and pleased to see that IRC is funding this through a new Foundations Award, a very important project. So main significance from UCD perspective, my being here is as Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. We've been in the university a lot of work over recent years to build a more inclusive community. We have constant dialogue with critical academic research around equality, diversity, inclusion, and I should say right at the outset that we never satisfy the demands of critical research around what we can and should do around EDI, but we do draw on very extensively on research and also on education commitments around equality, diversity, inclusion to advance what we're doing. In the area of LGBTQI rights and inclusion, a wide variety of actions, including a staff network, a subgroup of our University Management Team group on EDI, working directly on policy, monitoring implementation around LGBTQI matters. We have a gender identity expression policy that was recognised as a national award introduced in 2018. And most recently, amongst our major actions, has been a new dignity and respect policy, which has as a primary focus building a positive culture of dignity and respect. If you walk down the campus, you will see our current campaign against harassment and bullying and sexual violence, which is one of our positive measures, but we also have a very extensive educational training program. All our students, starting here, receive education around active consent, around dignity and respect, and also around bystander intervention and how they can act as a bystander. I think it's a very important component of that. And all staff are progressively being trained around both EDI and dignity and respect to build, say, a positive culture supported by a new support service, supporting those who are victims of bullying, harassment, sexual violence, sexual harassment, and supported also by an anonymous reporting tool allowing people to report without identifying themselves, plus a formal complaint system to address, in the context of this conference, probably the most relevant harassment with respect to the protected characteristics under legislation, which includes in UCD the so-called 10th round, socioeconomic status, alongside the 9 statutory equality grounds. As you may be able to tell, I could talk to you enthusiastically about EDI and UCD all day, so I'm not going to, and that's probably enough. enough to tell you about what we do in our university. The topic for today around combating anti-LGBTQ hate crime is both very important and also very timely. There's at least two reasons why it's very timely. First is I have shared with members of our university community really significant concern around a rise in anti-LGBTQI violence and hate speech over the past couple of years. In university, we recently issued a new statement of support to LGBTQI members of our community, and the concern is not just about our staff and students, but also about wider society. We have a very significant societal problem, and it's experienced very deeply by members of our community. I know that from many conversations I've had with people. That's the first point, and then the second reason it's timely is that, as you all know, I think, there's new legislation going through the Oireachtas at the moment to revise our current legislation on hate crime. And having no strong expertise in these matters, and being in a room full of people with very significant expertise in matters, I'm not going to say any more about that now, because that's what we're here for today. But I do look forward to listening very intently to this session, which I can't stay for the rest of the event over the coming 2 days. But I look forward to listening to this session, particularly because we've got two really wonderful experts here, very strongly engaged with the themes of our event. So let me move on and introduce them. So Alex Kondakov, who is not only speaking on this panel, but is also our host and organiser of today's event. Alex is an assistant professor and Alaska Fellow in UCD School of Sociology. I had the privilege of attending recently the launch of his book, Violent Affections, which addresses the combination of societal anti-LGBTQI hate crime, but also the state encouragement and promotion of that climate of hatred. And that's an enormously important topic, not just for Russia, of course, because the actions we see in the United States, in Hungary, and in other jurisdictions around state sponsorship of anti-LGBTQI hate action is, I think, extremely significant. And that's just part of Alex's expertise, and it's very broad, interesting expertise, not just in Russia, but also in Ireland and in other countries. So wonderful speaker starts off with the topic of combating hate in the new epoch, setting an inquiry agenda. And when we've heard from Alex, we'll hear from Liboni from the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, who is the senior policy officer with respect to equality and hate crime. But perhaps more significant for today, she's also the chair of the Coalition Against Hate Crime, which is one of the major civil society groups working to address change in our current arrangements. So it brings wonderful expertise before us today. So I'll ask Alex to speak first, then I'll ask Lou to speak, and then I hope that's good time for some questions, comments, and whatnot.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the generous introduction and for UCD actually to adopt this event here. I mean, yeah, definitely I'm one of the co-organizers of the event and of the project, but we wouldn't be here without all the support that we've got from the university and from the coalition and from the Irish Research Council. But my purpose here is for this first introductory kind of presentation. I have many purposes for this session. And first of all, I want to start by saying thank you all for coming and for your interest in this topic. I know that it's, yes, timely and topical in Ireland, but also, as I will try to show, and as our panelists all along these 2 days will show, it is actually timely and topical worldwide, and this is one of the important aspects of issue that we came here to discuss. I will go there actually to give you a proper presentation. So one of the purposes is to welcome you here on behalf of the kind of co-organizing committee, let's say. And the other purpose that I have in this presentation is to say, is to kind of introduce the topics of these 2 days, right? So I will go with a sort of overview of different issues that we'll discuss in more details all along these 2 days. And I also have another aim, another purpose of this conversation. It's to provoke you. It's to, well, hopefully, to give you kind of thought-provoking, as I called it, inquiry agenda for the next, not exactly 2 days, but maybe something more than that. So, as this workshop will shortly demonstrate, actually, the issue of anti-LGBTQ hate crime and violence more generally is not going away, and we've been witnesses of instances of violence against LGBTQ people in Ireland, in other countries. Just last week something happened. A year ago there was a huge assault on gay men in this very country, right? Where we think that legislation moved on to the wonderful different kind of state of affairs for LGBTQ community, right? But in fact, on the contrary, even I can say that more and more people, if you look at the statistics actually, globally, more and more people suffer from hate crime. Or at least we can see more and more instances of hate crime registered all around the world against LGBTQ people. And moreover, so this is one thing, and moreover, the issue of violence against LGBTQ people is becoming more and more complex, right? So in the context of a greater impact of online, of technology on our life, the issue is becoming more and more complex. So I have kind of two different dimensions of this problem here that I want to assert. Anti-LGBTQ violence is becoming a bigger, on the one hand, and on the other hand, more sophisticated phenomenon, right? And if we accept this as an initial point, then we have two central questions at the outset of this workshop. So one question is, what kind of tools do we have to face that avalanche of violence, right? What kind of tools we have to at our disposal to stop this avalanche of violence. And on the other hand, if the issue is becoming more complex, not only bigger or greater, are these tools actually adequate? Are they good enough, given the complexity of this, or this new kind of complexity of this issue? So the first question refers definitely to the problem of quantity, whereas the second one refers to the problem of quality of this issue. And in this presentation, I want to address those two questions. So I won't give you any answer to those two questions, but I will address them, I'm sure. I start by narcissistically talking about myself a little bit, and it's an important thing actually, because in many different aspects. But one thing is definitely something relevant here. So I come actually from Russia, right? A country that is currently definitely associated with violence. We are in the year 2023, and Russia kind of unleashed this violent war on its neighbor for no reason at all, and it continues to do so. But violent intentions of the Russian government definitely were known to us before, maybe in different kinds of instances of violence. And more specifically, they were not that different in this kind of anti-human rights aspect of it, but they were different in nature, and that's what I studied, or I have studied for my entire career. It was about the assault on kind of state-sponsored assault on individual people, simply for who they are or who they think they are. I actually published a book recently, as Colin mentioned, exactly on that. The book is open now, so just saying. So in this book I studied a very particular event that occurred about exactly 10 years ago, actually, in 2013. Back in 2013, the censorship gay propaganda law was enacted in Russia. It was first introduced there, and its stated objective was to limit children's access to gay content, right? So they just wanted to limit access to educational materials about LGBTQ topics, to public rallying about on LGBTQ and human rights issues. A sort of "Don't Say Gay" bill as they have now in Florida in the United States. However, notwithstanding the law's aim, ensuring difficulties in accessing gay content wasn't exactly its major purpose, and that's what the book is about. So I studied the effects of the law, of this law, and according to my analysis, violence against LGBTQ Russians started to grow significantly after 2013. And Sergei Katsuba will attest to that in his own research as well. In my analysis, it doubled by 2015 already, right? And we're talking about the tip of an iceberg here because it's just, my data comes from court rulings, court decisions. So all those cases came through the entire criminal justice system in Russia. So it's the selection, it's a sample made by Russian law enforcement agencies, right? So you can imagine how many cases they ignored. These are the cases they couldn't ignore. So almost half of them are homicides, actually. So these are really brutal violence. But let me explain better the intentions behind the law. This is what's important for me in this first presentation. The thing is that it had a very clear political mission, right? The law was introduced not to limit distribution of gay content and not to initiate a witch hunt. These were kind of byproducts of the law. Its true intention was to increase the support of the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. That was the main thing. And it was happening at the backdrop of his fading popularity, right? So the law was used as a manipulative strategy at the time when Putin got really scared of the masses of people protesting his return to the presidency on the streets of Russian cities and towns, and he was kind of anxious and scared of the masses of people there, and Putin and his government, they kind of pressured the parliament to introduce a series of unreasonably violent laws and emotionally, let's say, yeah, all those bills were kind of emotionally charged bills, and the gay propaganda law was definitely central to these manipulative efforts, central to this strategy. In other words, the law was a remedy from losing power, and it worked, right? It's still there. The thing is that it's not actually specific to Russia. That's my point here. And it can be seen both kind of across the world today, but also throughout the human history. It's the very same strategies, tactics were used in other places, in other times. Whenever the governments try to spread hate towards an already marginalized population, they are actually involved in some kind of political struggle for a share of people's love, or a share of people's support. And thus they target long-lasting divisions in our societies, such as sexuality, but not only that, race, ethnicity, all sorts of inequalities, hoping that they will receive enough political legitimacy in return. Right? So they do it on purpose. In Europe alone, I mean, there have been many dramatic events inciting heated debates around sexuality, most probably leading towards very same or similar targeted violence, from harmful debates around abortion crusades in Poland to anti-transgender smear campaigns in the UK. There were many. And if we look no further than similar to gay propaganda ideas, so Lithuania 2009 is one example. The law is still on books, and I think it's the law which banned expresses contempt for family values, banned information that expresses contempt for family values, but in the everyday interaction it's referred to as gay propaganda law. Or, if you remember, Poland, around 100 of municipalities or more introduced something they called LGBT-free zones, where, again, promotion of homosexuality is officially banned. Hungary introduced its own gay propaganda law in 2021. And we don't need to stop in Europe. For one example, Ghanaian parliamentarians seek to outlaw promotion of LGBT advocacy in the situation when they have LGBTQ sexuality is already criminalized. You know, in that context, they want more. Or just last week, Florida government governor signed into law bills which ban gender studies, EDI efforts in colleges, gender-neutral toilets across the public sector in the state. And this is in addition to Don't Say Gay bill that is already there, that is already active there. So, and let me be clear, these efforts of the governments, they don't have to be solely focused on sexuality. This graph, for example, I missed before, but anyway, this graph, for example, gives you the numbers of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes in the United Kingdom over the years from 2009 to 2021. So the last registered by ODIHR, right? And the growth here starts somewhere in 2015. Coincidentally, the start of Brexit campaign, right? So these kind of manipulative strategies don't have to be focused on sexuality in order to have very particular and macabre effect on LGBTQ people's lives. This is my point. And these numbers are, as you see, high, but they use a different methodology. And we should talk about that too. These are incidents of violence registered by the police and then sent to ODIHR, and we are talking about thousands of cases, right? From 8,000 in 2015 to 22,000 in 2020. In many of these countries, there's a very developed, however imperfect, hate crime legislation, right? Protecting LGBTQ people from violence. And my example showed that it might be currently not enough. This is the provocation. So the rest of my talk, my presentation here will be about this provocation. We need to start thinking about tools to control politicians who ignite these kind of against those already marginalized. But I don't want to say that hate crime law is useless or unnecessary. That's not my point. On the contrary, I think that its job is kind of creating a special category. And once that category is created, we can now make this sort of figures. We can understand what's happening. We can track the whereabouts of this kind of violence. But this kind of violence can be detected, it can be recorded, it can be exposed, and that's an important work. Once such crime is exposed, it can be dealt with. The situation which incentivizes such crime can be problematized. We can all see the evidence of harm which violence, physical or rhetorical, does to some of us, right? So it is important work. So I'm not arguing against hate crime law. Instead, I'm kind of inviting us to think beyond it. What else should we do to make sure that people do not suffer, right? What should we educate more or differently? Should we stop bigots from getting to politics? How we do that? Should we learn how to distinguish lies from truth on the internet? So I think we are going to talk about it tomorrow at our last session, the session that is dedicated to ideas beyond hate crime law exactly. Right? What do we do with hate crime in general? As for my presentation here, I just want to give an idea of general direction where we could look at for solutions. And in doing so, I'll again, narcissistically continue to talk about myself. But it relates to the workshop and how it's organized. So I come to this workshop as a scholar, right? As an academic. The workshop is on collaboration between academia and practitioners and civil society, and I think that any solution we invent and any idea we entertain needs to be approached from these various perspectives. And it's not that I can distinguish my activist self from my academic self, but this is exactly what I want to think about in the meaning of the presentation, right? So it is in the title of this workshop that we analyze anti-LGBTQ violence and hate crime collaboratively as a coalition of academics and activists, practitioners, and simply, people of goodwill. Well, in this entanglement, my position is that of an academic. But what does it mean to occupy that position? I'm kind of preoccupied with this label. How's it different from an activist perspective? And I guess it is different in one aspect. It is theoretical. It's more abstract, right? This is what academics bring into the field. We can all feel differently about theory, but this is what we professionally deal with as academics. And this is what I want to offer. Yeah, kind of a theory that can underpin new solutions to the old problem in this new era. So, if we think of hate crime law theoretically, it's usually regarded as a happy ending scenario. Not the happy ending you're thinking about, but sort of utopia, a better and brighter future. We introduce the law, and the thing it deals with disappears or at least diminishes. And in LGBTQ history, if we look at it from an academic perspective, this logic is known as utopian, queer utopian thinking. The future is always brighter. Yeah, because it gets better. One bill after another, it gets better. One law after another. And queer utopia is part and parcel of this positive thinking linked to progressivism or modernism overall, probably because it's a US-American invention. Queer theory tends towards figuring out a utopia. It seeks to identify current unjust conditions. I have some illustrations here as well of this. and to identify those conditions and eradicate them with some kind of interventions and to advance to a better situation. It kind of disrupts current currents of power, and it creates a completely new sociality. This is the utopian aspiration of queer theory. As a result of subversions of power, we are presented with contrasts of the society in which all people are equal and everything is good enough. So I argue that this obsession of queer theory with utopianism can be overcome, and we need to create some kind of foundation for a more realist form of thinking here. It's arguably admirable, probably, to imagine a future when things get better, right? And I actually do not deny that this very imagination does something to our present. It is important. But nonetheless, I argue that if our vision is obscured with this idea of queer utopia and progress more generally, we may miss the point that things can become worse in the future. And this is why, I'm talking about myself here. Because this is another lesson I take from Russia, from my studies of Russia. In Russia, things always only get worse. I do not want to sound alarmist, but if we think abstractly how this idea might help us, how we can look at this current situations, even in the West, differently, this is one of the ways to relate to it. Every change should be taken without value judgment. Now, once again, a new law does not necessarily lead to a better future. This is a lesson we can learn from dystopian Russia. I write about this in my book too. Despite changes to the better in 1993, for example, in the 1990s more generally, queer people are still targeted there as queers, and increasingly so. And more oppressive legislation is being created with the gay propaganda law amended just last year in 2022 to include not only children but the entire adult population. And of course, authoritarian dictatorship becomes even more and more pronounced. Will this be the future of Florida or Hungary? Well, I hope not, and probably it won't. But I think it's far more helpful to recognize that we do not know the future, and we do not know if it will be better. And it's not necessarily will be worse, but it's a kind of analytical attitude that we can bring to the table. Just to conclude, one illustration. We know that very different forces constitute our societies, and some of them might appear marginal at the moment, but they can get, more potent with time. Just a couple of days ago, I received an email from a colleague here in UCD replying to my invitation to this workshop. I just spread the word around. I will not tell you who this person is, of course, or from which department they are, but I will read from it a little bit. Dear Alexander, I kindly request to be taken off any emails from you and the School of Sociology. I am not in your school. I do not agree with a lot of ideology that underpins this workshop. There appears to be a lot of the use of the word hate and terms like hate crime activism. There is no hate in my heart whatsoever. I just simply don't agree, as a scientist, with much of ideology. This is my writing. I'm deeply, deeply troubled with the hate crime bill making its way through the Irish legislature. This is a chilling piece of law to me, as regardless of what it would be about. The problem is, it basically legalizes the punishment of one's thoughts and expressions. It is Orwellian thought crime. Right? This is a position taken by some of the educators who currently have access to this society's future. So instead of utopian progressivism to which we all tend to subscribe, a more realist version of temporality, a more cautious attitude towards the future may posit the possibilities of a truly dedicated analysis. This is just for that academic part of it. Analysis of any legal initiative, of any tool of prevention of LGBTQ violence, of any solution to the problem. And I kind of invite us all to invest in this realist analysis. I'm offering my academic perspective, a perspective of gloomy dystopian kind, yes, but it's one of many, and that's the more positive part of it. Our strength is that it's just a facet of a coalition of what? Which we are able to do once we are together. And so this workshop is exactly about that. It's about creating or continuing this coalition of work. It's the workshop about finding ways to prevent violence from growing in numbers and complexity from obscuring what is real and true. So, welcome all once again. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Alex. That's very good setting the scene for us for what happens over the next couple of days. I also want to say I'm so sorry you got that email. That is not, in my view, an appropriate use of our email systems. And we won't address that further now, but I'm very sorry about that. So thanks to sharing with those. Liboni from the Irish Civil Liberties, and this topic is hate crime versus war. An unprecedented opportunity to tackle hate crime in Ireland, which I guess is going to address the current legislative environment.
Exactly. Thanks a million. First of all, can you all hear me well? Is it okay if I remain here? Fantastic. Thanks. Thanks, Alex, for the presentation. Thanks, everyone, for being here. My name is Luna. As said, my pronouns are she, her. My task for today is to briefly, I'll stick to the times where, give you a sort of a snapshot for where the conversation in relation to hate crime and extremist speech, hate speech are in Ireland. I'll do so as the policy officer of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, the civil liberties organisation in Ireland, and as a coalition against, the chair of the Coalition Against Hate Crime. I'll make a major differentiation, so I'll generally speak from the perspective of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, and I will specify when I'm speaking or reflecting, let's say, the views of the 23 organizations and the work that we're doing together. So a lot of the elements of what I have to say today tie up very well with what you've already said, so good to go. So I'll start with some numbers, which is always good in terms of when you're in an academic setting, I would say. 2 months ago, just 2 months ago, Anti-LGBTQ published its most recent numbers on reports of hate crimes and hate speech incidents in Ireland, and hate incidents, in Ireland. These numbers tell us that there's been an increased number of recorded hate crime and incidents of approximately 30%, but 29% to be precise, with a total of 582 hate-related incidents compared to the 448 of 2021. And a major disclaimer needs to be made. Anti-LGBTQ itself recognizes that these numbers are at the lowest end that we can expect, because Ireland, as many other countries in the world facing hate crime and addressing hate crime, suffers from very high level of underreporting. And we can back this up thanks to the work of civil society organizations in Ireland. We have INA here that collect, let's say, data on the numbers of incidents. As said, ICCL is the chair of the Coalition Against Hate Crime. The Coalition Against Hate Crime is a coalition of 23 civil society organizations that represent communities that are commonly targeted by hate crime and hate speech in Ireland. I like to say that we are united in our diversity, because many communities that are impacted by hate crime in Ireland are represented. Disabled people, ethnic minority communities, women, LGBTI+ people, and an intersection of identities. I think that's something that it's important to bear in mind in a conference that talks about anti-LGBTQ hate crime, that LGBTQ people are not only LGBTQ. So there will be an intersection of identities when we look at hate crime. So the coalition against hate crime, to be fairly honest, was not surprised at all when we saw a rise of recorded numbers of hate crime, because this really reflects a general perception backed up by a fair amount of research, I would say, or even just talking on helpline, support line with communities, that there is a general perception of rise of hate crime, of extreme hate speech in the country. And it's also true for the LGBT communities, especially when we go back to the data that you presented. Race is the #1, let's say, protected ground. The majority of the reports are on the ground of race. The second most reported ground is sexual orientation. It's hard to break down, let's say, the other characteristic. Gender expression and gender identity fall under gender, and we don't have a further disaggregation of the data. We don't have information on sex characteristics. So just to say that even if the information are recorded, there is space to record better. And this is one of the points that we constantly make as a coalition against hate crime. But even if a lot of the dimension of hate crime is the perception of the communities, and I am myself part of one of the impacted communities. I am myself a lesbian woman, and there is a general perception, even when we read the press, community press on GCN for the last 12 months, there's been at least one report of hate crime. So hate crime is in the air, even in the conversation within communities. So we've been talking about hate crime so far, but we haven't addressed what a hate crime is. So I would take a step back. I usually take two approaches on defining hate crime. The mind approach and the heart. A hate crime is an ordinary offense that has a biased motive. This is the definition that has been agreed at an OSC level, the agency that then takes the number, like records the number of hate crime. What hate crimes really are, hate crimes are message crimes. One act can make an entire community feel unsafe and unwelcome. That's precisely the message that is being conveyed. As a coalition against hate crime, we've launched a campaign that is precisely called Hate Crime Hurts Us All. And hate crime hurts us all because the impact of one act goes beyond the individual. It affects the community. It weakens the society to the point that hate crime is truly everyone's business. Also because we tend, not we, I use the we, the plural we, but sometimes in the narrative we tend to forget that everyone could be a victim of a hate crime, because ultimately the reason why you are identified is the perception of the person that commits an attack. So just to say that if we look at it in this framework, at least 582 times in 2022, a message has been delivered to communities that they're not safe and welcome. And I guess that's one of the reasons why it's very important that as a coalition and as individual civil society organization, we're allowed to send an even louder message to communities that we are working on it. We're trying to address the complexity of hate crime, because hate crime is a complex matter to address. So similarly, and just linking it to what you were saying, Alex, about the pattern of Russia, it's interesting to note that 2022 is the 30th anniversary of decriminalization in Ireland, and a lot of progress. We've observed a lot of progress in the country in relation to the rise of LGBT people. But the work is not done, and I read an article yesterday on the Irish Times where the CEO of Outhouse, one of the spaces for LGBT community in Ireland, Ocean, he said, and I'm going to roughly quote him because I don't have the quote with me, that LGBT people can walk down the aisle, have the right to walk down the aisle, but when they hold each other's hand in the street, they have to look over their shoulder. And I think it's a very good and powerful image of where we are at the moment in terms of the rights that are recognized by the state and the perception of security and safety and being able to be who you are in the country. So in terms of where we are with hate crime, we have a lot of power of movement, like a margin of movement for the review of hate crime in legislation, because we have no hate crime legislation in Ireland. So what we're actually doing at the moment is introducing, for the first time, hate crime legislation in the country. What we have is a single piece of legislation from 1989, which is the prohibition of incitement to hatred, which looks at extreme hate speech. And the purpose of this legislation that has the longest name, and I will name once for all, Criminal Justice Incitement to Violence or Hatred and Hate Offences Bill 2022, is precisely to do two things. Imagine the amount of times that I've had to write it to know it by heart in this way. So the purpose of this legislation is to do two things: to review the existing provision on extreme hate speech that Ireland already has, and also to address a little bit the panic about introducing new measures to address extreme hate speech. Good news, we have a piece of legislation that has been described as unworkable pretty much over the years, and that's why a review was undertaken. And the Criminal Justice Act is also introducing hate crime legislation for the first time. Now, the coalition, ICCL individually, and the coalition have been quite active in advocating for the introduction of hate crime legislation. Having hate crime legislation makes a difference, and makes a difference to our communities, for society, and for the criminal justice system overall. In terms of communities, it sends a message. It sends a message that the additional harm that is caused by such crimes is recognized by the state and can be addressed. It sends a deterrent message to society that such behavior is not accepted. And from a legal perspective, at a criminal justice level, it makes the invisible visible, meaning that at the moment, the hate element of an offense, which makes hate crime a special category of crime, as you described it, the hate element gets lost. Without a specific provision, specific legislation, hate crime legislation, the hate element from the recording to the sentence often gets lost. There is no consistency in the way that hate crime is addressed, is identified and addressed throughout the criminal justice system. And when we talk about criminal justice, I would say that consistency is something that we really are aiming at for the interest of everyone. And I say it from civil liberties perspective, from the interest of a victim of hate crime, but also for a defense, let's say, perspective. So we've been very active advocating for this legislation, and this legislation is making its way through the Oireachtas, and we're, let's say, we'll come together as these 23 organization making some recommendations, suggested changes. Now, I will not get into legislative analysis at 11:23 at the beginning of a 2-day conference, but maybe just a snapshot of some general principles that we are following. Legislation needs to reflect the needs and experiences of all communities that are impacted. Lived experience needs to be, lived experience, but also the diversity on how hate crime is experienced by different communities needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed by clear definitions that don't leave anyone behind. It needs to be addressed to the identifying the offenses that are the most common offenses that are committed against individuals or protected groups. Legislation, and again, as a civil liberties organization, we're very strong on this, needs to be proportionate. And here I'm taking, let's say, as ICCL, I would take a look 1 second about like what is at stake when we're talking about extremist speech that is under this legislation. First of all, our suggested approach at the very beginning, when we were consulted, was to separate extremist speech and hate crime, because we're talking about two linked but two categories of crime. Incitement to hate or extremist speech is a standalone offense, is a new offense. When we're looking at hate crime, it's an existing offense that has a bias motive. Criminalizing, like the use of criminal justice, like we feel strongly about the fact that only extreme forms of hate speech should be tackled through the criminal justice system. And this doesn't mean that it's the only type of speech that we need to address, but it's a type of speech that we need to address with these instruments. Well, a set of other measures should be introduced. And you see, as a civil liberties organization, we often get contacted expressing our view on freedom of expression and the balancing between freedom of expression and the right to non-discrimination on equality. And it's very hard balancing to get right. And we're following guidance at an international level. We're looking at good practice from abroad. And the way that I usually describe hate speech and what should fall under extremist speech legislation, hate speech can be imagined as a pyramid, and only the top part, the speech that creates harm, falls under the criminal, let's say, side. And it's important to recognize and to remember that the European Court of Human Rights has recognized that speech can offend and should offend, shock, and disturb. But what is at stake in these pieces of legislation is that everyone has the right to offend, shock, and disturb, but nobody should have the right to harm. And that's what we're looking at with this piece of legislation. And of course, as a civil society organization, we'll keep, as ICCL, but also as Coalition Against Hate Crime, we'll keep engaging to make this legislation, to ensure that these legislations go in a direction that we think is the right direction. So the work even for legislation is not done yet. I 100% agree, and the coalition as a whole agrees that hate crime legislation should only be seen as one instrument to address wide societal problems. In order to, when we talk about effective measure and effective legislation, we start from the premise that one hate crime is one hate crime too much, and that the best way to tackle and combat hate crime is to prevent hate crime from happening. The legislation, the introduction of legislation should be seen as a pillar to create a structure. And that's why, as a Coalition Against Hate Crime, we're strongly advocating for the introduction of an action plan. An action plan that adopts makes us, as a society, adopt a wider, more comprehensive approach. That is also something that we've been asked and required by at an international level. I like what you said about seeing hate crime law as an happy ending, because whether happy or unhappy, hate crime is the departing point, cannot be an ending. And that's what we've said in multiple occasions, even to the Minister of Justice himself, that we need to come together. We need to, even as we are in this room, to have communities that are impacted, representatives from the criminal justice system, judges, prosecutors, and our Shahana, victim support. We need to come together and create an action, like a strategy, to identify which actions we need to take to address hate crime, and also to address hate speech beyond criminal justice. And what we've learned at the civil society level is that we're talking about a plan, and we're not talking about a strategy, because a plan is something that can identify clear actions, clear time frames, can be budgeted. Human and financial resources are needed, otherwise we're talking aspirational, and can be monitored. We need to stick to a plan to build, let's say, the Ireland in which we want to live. And what would fall under this action plan is it's a series of measures. It's training, it's awareness raising, it's additional written support, and ultimately it would serve the purpose of better understanding to better address hate crime. So this is pretty much, I would say, where we are at the moment, and very looking forward to hearing everyone's expertise.
It's very appropriate place, I think, to stop for this introductory session to think about, on the one hand, the importance of Bill going through the eruptus, but on the other hand, to think about the limits of law, and to do the observation that in order to build the society we want, is not simply about legislating, but it's about a wider interactions to which legislation contributes, and indeed the debate about legislation. So it's a very, I think, probably a very important theme for you over the next couple of days. Just looking at that, we've just about had time. Yeah. Could we take 5 minutes for burning questions or comments, or do you need to stop here and go to the next panel?
I think burning, yeah.
Yeah. So there'll be lots of discussion over the couple of days, both formally in sessions and over lunch and coffee and so on. So we might just take any burning questions or comments arising at Alex or Linda's presentations. Yeah.
Yeah. What countries are getting it right as far as strategies or implementing plans following hate crime legislation that is showing to be efficacious, or have different approaches that are proving to work well?
That's a $100 million question, to be honest. I think that all the people involved in hate crime would have less sleepless night if there was a precise model to follow. I think that we can pick different bits and pieces from different jurisdictions. In terms of an action plan, countries that have introduced action plans are Spain, England and Wales has a history of action plan and strategy, and the latest, let's say, the country that has followed the most similar pattern and has introduced legislation not so long ago that is embarking in this journey similarly to Ireland is Scotland, and they've just published a strategy and committed to the delivery of an action plan. So these are amongst the countries that we're currently looking at.
Anything else? I might draw this section to a close. I've read Alex's critique of progressivism in the context of Ireland and Russia, and very much alive to what we said about not falling into the trap of saying things are better and so on. However, I do want to highlight today one item of progressivism with respect to the legal system. So yesterday it was announced that Aileen Donnelly will be the first Supreme Court judge in Ireland who identifies as gay or lesbian. She's a graduate of UCD Law School. We're very proud of the university of that. And it does bear on the question of who are the judges. It does bear on the question of how the legal system works. And so I think it's an important moment, but it's not to critique of progressivism, but just to highlight that